You're watching Business Edge on New Central Television. Now, Ghana is facing an imminent power crisis due to an outstanding debt of $1.73 billion owed to independent power producers. The IPPs have rejected any discussion of debt restructuring even before the government presents a formal proposal. Instead, they are demanding an immediate payment of 30% of the debt to ensure continued power supply beyond June 30, 2023. This situation has raised concerns about potential load shedding, and it actually threatens the government's energy sector reform objectives under the International Monetary Fund Extended Credit Facility Program. The IMF has released the first tranche of $600 million to Ghana, with an additional $600 million contingent upon energy sector reforms. Now, the energy sector is burdened by legacy debt totaling about $2 billion as of May 2023 and a projected debt of $5.9 billion between 2023 and 2025. So this morning, joining me to discuss this development, I have Paul Frimpong from Accra, Ghana. He's the Executive Director, Africa China Center for Policy and Advisory. It's nice to have you join us, Paul, on the show. You might need to unmute your device so that we can hear you properly.
Okay, can you hear me?
Okay, beautiful. Yes, we can hear you now. Okay. So $1.73 billion is what the Ghanaian government is owing the IPPs. Now, why is it that the government has failed to pay for services rendered? Does it have to do with the culture, or it is due to financial constraints?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on this program. I think when it comes to power and electricity, I think it's something that is very critical for every economy, especially countries in the sub-region. For Ghana, we need a constant supply of power, and anything that threatens is something that bothers everyone in the country. Especially if you're government of the day, then there will be more pressure on you. And in the past, issues about power has been very huge and always a huge political conversation every election cycle as to who performed better. Basically, it's become the standard of measurements of how a government performs, who kept the light on longer during their tenure. So when conversations like this come up, obviously, it's not just about even money, political implication as well. So you see that the government will try as much as possible to get a needed solution. Now, when we look at Ghana's power sector, right? So we have three major agents that are involved in the power structural industry in Ghana. So we have an organization called the Volta River Authority, which is Ghana's mandated power generation company, that the VRA. And then we have another company in the middle called GRIDCO, which is the transmission of power. And then we have the Ghana Electricity Company, or Electricity Company of Ghana, ECG, which is the one that actually sells to the final consumer. So we, institutions, individual households, we buy electricity from the Electricity Company of Ghana. So these are the three involved. Now, due to the government's inability or capacity to be able to produce or provide the needed power that the country needs to run on, at least to keep the light on for couple hours and all of that, they had to create a room for independent other layer of power producers called the independent power producers, which actually produces the power and also sells it to the government through the Volta River Authority, and then the transmission is done through the GRIDCO, and then it sells back to the people through the ECG. So that has been the kind of, so the government has a social contract with people, but they also have a business contract with the IPPs. It states that, guys, I'm in no position to do the needed or the total investment needed in the power sector to be able to produce the kind of power that the country needs. So why don't you come in if you have an investment that you want to invest in the sector, you produce the power, I will buy it, run it through my system, and it gets to the final consumer, which is the citizens and the industry support that need the power. So that is the kind of contract that the government has. Now, as we know, in most countries in the sub-region like Ghana, the government subsidizes the power that the individual consumer buys. All right. So if the government, let's say, government is buying the power from the independent power producer, like let's say 15, let's say $10 per watt, the government will sell it to us as citizens around, let's say, $5 or $6 per watt. Now that means that the government has to find the remaining $6 or $5 difference to be able to be at the level that it can pay off the $10 that it paid from it bought from the independent power producers, right? Now the accumulation of these kind of gap, of course, the consumers we are paying every month. You have to pay your electricity bill. If you're a company, you are obliged to pay your electricity bill to the government. So that part of the $5 or $6 that we buy from the electricity company of Ghana, I mean from the government, is paid for. So the difference.
Sorry to cut in, Paul. Why is it now that the government has failed to meet up with its own obligation in terms of payments? Because I understand the details that you have tabled now and the contractual agreement that it has with the independent power producers. So now that we understand what the contract entails, why is it that the Ghanaian government has not been able to pay, either in terms of subsidy or services being rendered in terms of power availability? Why?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, as we know, every government runs on debt, right? There's no going to be any point that we say the government is free of debt. I mean, there are a lot of agencies and agents that government work with. And so obviously there will be a time that you are not in the position to be able to pay. I mean, governments expect to rake in money from different sources, through revenue, through foreign exchanges, in terms of what the government sells to the external market and what comes to the country, and then you decide, okay, I'm going to use 5% to pay this debt that we owe. But there are some instances that are conditioned that goes beyond what the government can do in terms of that. So when there's any shortfall in these kind of projections that the government has made, that based on this projection, we're able to bring in this amount of money, and therefore we can pay this percentage to our independent power producers. If any of those things don't come to pass, then the government will be in a fix, and that has been a continuous kind of structure. And we know, because government is a continuous business, owing or have been in debt is not something that anyone is new to. But then again, when we look at some of the issues that has come up as to why we are facing or we are in a deep energy sector debt, in this case, more with regard to the IPPs, has got to do with some of the agreement that the government is or have actually entered into with these IPPs, right? So the government of Ghana goes through what we call the Purchasing Power Agreement, the PPA, which is the standard agreement that the government signs with some of these independent power producers. Now, in this PPA, it has come out that this kind of agreement, when it was signed, seems to be, cutting off the government so much, because it is signed under what we call take or pay, right? So what it means is that whatever the power producers, they produce, first in terms of capacity, you have to pay. In terms of the excess capacity, you have to pay. So whether you are taking the energy they are producing or not, you are supposed to pay for that, right? Now, there are instances where even the installed capacity, so Ghana, roughly, we are doing about around 5,000 megawatts of installed capacity, right? So if we are supposed to have or be at full capacity, we should be producing about 5,000 megawatts of power every other year. Unfortunately, we are doing around 2,000, a little over 2,000 megawatts of power that is generated in Ghana. That means that we have excess in terms of installed capacity. But guess what? Due to the agreement the government has, they have to pay. Now, what has been the reason why we have excess capacity and not being able to generate to the full capacity? Because if we generate to the full capacity of 5,000 megawatts and we need, let's say, 3,000 or 4,000, of course, we can sell the 1,000 megawatts to neighboring countries, which sometimes we do to Togo, to Burkina Faso, to even some countries here. But then again, we do not have the means to be able to do the full capacity. But then you sign an agreement that you're going to pay these independent power producers at this installed capacity. So first, they are not even to produce the capacity. And even they produce and there's an asset, you still have to pay for them whether you use it or not, right? So there's been instances about why this is the case. Again, it is tracked to know that the government also loses a lot of power through the transmission transmission system that we use, right? So calls have been made that there has to be involved reinvestment in the transmission side of infrastructure of our transmission system.
Paul, I'd like to find out. I understand your standpoint and what you mean. 30% is what the IPPs are asking for. That's about $519 million out of $1.73 billion that is owed. Do you think that the Ghanaian government will be able to provide the funds to pay for that? Because, of course, if the IPPs, just as they have issued a threat that they will shut down the power grid to the power stations, the power plants to the national grid, if that happens, now, it would affect the power generation drive of the government. It would affect businesses. It will be a monumental loss for the business environment in Ghana. But then I'd like to find out to what extent do you think that will go if the IPPs go ahead to shut down the grid, and if the government will be able to source the funds to pay so that there won't be a national collapse in the energy sector?
Yeah, so three things, right? So if you look at the role or the contribution of independent power producers, it's very significant, right? In fact, the whole of Africa, Ghana's IPPs ranks fourth in terms of their capacity and their contribution to the power generation in the respective countries. So Ghana is the number 4. So you have South Africa, you have Kenya, you have Nigeria, and Ghana is the 4th in terms of IPPs contribution to national energy generation. So it is very significant. And look at Ghana, the case of Ghana, for example, 65% of our thermal energy is from the IPP. So the IPPs are surely involved in the thermal generation, power generation here, about 65% of it. So yes, if there's any glitch in the flow or the supply of the energy generation from this IPP, as a result of the conversation that we are having now, then of course, we will be in a fix, and there could be, as has already been posited, that there could be some form of power crisis hovering around the corner. Now, this conversation, of course, I mean, with all this, we must also know that government has not made any formal proposal to the IPPs. This is stemming from, actually, the whole conversation is stemming from the fact that people are, of course, we are aware of the kind of arrangement that we are having with the IMF in terms of the recent bailout that has come in. And so for the next tranche to be released, and trust me, the IMF has been, very, even recently, even as recent as a couple of weeks ago, the country director of the World Bank, in the report leading to the IMF and the loan and everything, mentioned that, the energy sector debt is a very critical component of why Ghana has been in this debt crisis. We have to go to the IMF, right? So clearly, there's a huge debate, and that is why the IPPs are sounding, a note of caution that we are in already a difficult phase. We have also our contractors and our suppliers that we're working with. And for them, we do not have the luxury to go back to them to renegotiate or restructure. So even if government makes any formal proposal,
yes,
they are saying that they are not in a position to restructure any.
All right,
so
there's Paul, there's another debatable situation as regards the IPPs and the government, and that has to do with restructuring of this debt. The IPPs have actually vehemently refused any form of restructuring of this debts being owed. And that is because they borrowed monies from banks and from creditors, and of course, to fund their business, that is the power supply chain. And it's been hard for them to recoup on their investments, to pay back the creditors, and of course, continue with the machination, the role of the machination of their businesses. Now, would you say that it's been unpatriotic on their side to refuse to have a restructuring deal come into place, because it seems as though that the Ghanaian government might not be able to, as you've said, raise the necessary funds to pay up this debt? Or would you say that it's because they're in a dire straits, so they don't have a choice rather than to go through this crude path of seeing how to recover their funds from the government?
There cannot be any card of patriotism on the table when it comes to what we are discussing, because we've already stated the fact that these IPPs are playing a very critical role in the kind of flow of power that we are enjoying in the country. And these are private, independent power producers, and they've made huge investment, as you alluded to earlier. So we are not talking about being patriotic. In fact, for stepping out and investing in this sector alone is enough. But then they are supposed to be paid what they are due. So there's and of course, that's what we call debt. So debt means that the government owes them. Okay, so that alone shows that it's not as if they are saying that, okay, even the ones that I'm getting to supply, you have to pay me. They are talking about the ones that they've supplied to the government and the government has deployed or used or sold out to individuals and households. So that's what they're demanding. That's what they're talking about. That, in fact, if you do this, if you continue, then we are going to cripple the kind of work that we are doing. And if we all accept that they are providing very essential services that is keeping the power on, then of course we must, prioritize the kind of debt that we owe to them and find ways and means to be able to pay these independent power so that they can continue doing the work that they're doing, supplying the power to the government.
All right, so for the IPPs, is there a possibility whereby these IPPs can divert their services to alternative markets? Probably there are other consumer options whereby they can channel their services and get their money from, just as we see that it seems as though the government cannot pay either all or part of what is being owed. Or would that be tantamount to economic sabotage if they have to jettison the contractual agreement that they have with the Ghanaian government and look for other market sources whereby they know that if they provide power to those areas or to those countries, they can get money for what they are supplying in terms of power?
Yes. There are alternatives that are available to them, but of course, it's also going to require some, other level of investment. Of course, unless they de-invest and then they try to relocate to other countries and invest. But as long as they've done their investment and you know how the energy, power generation, you know how these are, fixtures and fittings. These are, tangible infrastructure that has been set up by these independent power producers. And of course, we all know that the government is more of a reliable, buyer, when it comes to some of these, capital-intensive investments. And of course, some of these even IPPs, before they even put money on the ground, they would have already signed a purchasing power agreement with the government before the first investment is even being made. So you put your proposal together, you submit, you go through the procedure, you go to the energy ministry and the various agencies that satisfy you and say, okay, if you're able to produce this capacity, we are in the position to buy. Then they can even go out there to look for the funding to come and invest. So, so it becomes a bit of the government was already their primary and their main source of some of these investments that they've done. So diversifying and of course de-investing will be a very long and huge loss to them in terms of that kind of alternative. Yes, we can try and get other individuals or organizations that are willing to buy, but in terms of their ability and how much they can buy from you is also limited, unlike what the government can buy from you.
All right.
When you produce for them. So all right. There has to be a trade-off, in this kind of conversation.
All right. So finally, before I let you go, Paul, we understand how power rationing, power cuts is very, very critical to businesses and small businesses, corporate businesses, and all that. And we see what's happening in South Africa, even as it struggles with having to provide power for the business community. We don't want to have a replication of that in Ghana. So what do you think the Ghanaian government can do to address the dearth in the energy sector? Because it's been said that even that sector has been underfunded, as it were, that there's not been enough funds to power that particular sector. So what do you think the Ghanaian government can do? I just need a response in just about a minute, please. Thank you.
Yes, of course. They have to find a way to discuss and have a clear plan for these independent power producers, because we cannot afford to get their work curtailed as a result of government's inability to pay the debt that they owe to them. They must have some level of conversation, give a clear plan or pipeline, and give a kind of work outline that can also favor the kind of negotiation that IPPs will also have their suppliers and the people that they owe, and that would be very key. Again, in terms of Ghana, we've had discussion about how the government can actually save up, in terms of the losses that happens to us in terms of transmitting the power that we've generated. Even now, there's been a structural adjustment in terms of even tariffs. So even now in Ghana, every quarter, there's an adjustment of our utilities, water and electricity, every quarter that has been instituted. And that is, of course, going to also help the government to even losing it, the kind of, or the amount that the government is paying to be able to make the sector sustainable. And of course, we must also look for more diversification in terms of energy sources. Of course, try and project the sector in a way that can be more attractive to other investment, and that can also take a huge, toll off the government's shoulder to ensure that it's constant. The sector is almost always well funded, and all the money that's needed to pay the debt that are there also. In fact, in 2016, 2017, the government issued a bond of about $2.5 billion to pay some of the legacy debt that has been existing for years. And I believe that some of this innovativeness, once we are back on the economy track, which is now we don't want to issue any bond situation,
All right.
I think these things can help the government going.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.